Welcome again to this webinar series, MEL 316 Practice. We called it a webinar series, but as you all know, this has been very participatory and we've managed to get to learn from each other and share our experiences experimenting with systems MEL. So we are super excited that we've been able to provide that space for us all to interact and connect. That's one of the richest parts of this journey, in our opinion. So we are in the last module. We've gone through the foundations, the orientation lens, the spiral. We've introduced it, but we will finalize some examples today. We were able to go through some of the MEL 360 tools in the last session, such as the leverage points and signals of change. And today, we will do a few things, but the most exciting thing perhaps for you all is the Ask Me Anything session, where we will be, as you know, we requested you to send us some questions in advance, and we will also be taking some questions live, and hopefully we will be able to answer some of them. But if not, we don't have all the answers, and that's part of the practice. So we will continue to reflect on this, and we're happy to send follow-up questions if we don't get through all of that today. And then I will pass it on briefly to my colleague Fede to talk us through the community guidelines.
Thank you, Andrea. So as always, we are going to record this last session together with the rest of the sessions. If you prefer to not appear in the recording, please, while speaking, raising any question lively, please turn off your camera. Otherwise, we will encourage you to turn on your camera. Please, for today, we enable the Q&A feature. Feel free to drop any questions there. You can find it at the bottom of your screen. It has a question icon. And also to share any reflections in the chat box. Also, during the live Q&A, please feel free to raise your hand and unmute yourself to ask any questions. Also, while not speaking, please mute yourself and always be respectful while sharing any feedback. And over to you, Andrea.
Thank you so much, Fede. So let's get started. We are at module 4. What are we going to be covering today? So I already explained some of it, but we are going to do a brief recap of session 3 and a few reflections around the homework. We will be able to finalize the walkthrough through the spiral, and we will be able to touch upon a couple of the MEL 2 tools in practice, the how-to sheet specifically. You did prioritize the systems-informed theory of change as well as the leverage points, which we covered last session. So today we had the plan to bring you Isabel Bogle. She actually developed a systems-informed theory of change for a climate organization, and it's wonderful. But she had an unexpected occurrence, so she will not be able to join us today. However, I will be able to present our template on the systems informed theory of change. And then we will be hearing from Simone Uriartt. She is a designer from the System Transformation and Innovation team at UNDP's Digital AI and Innovation Hub. And she will be discussing the applications of the strategic intent and domains of change within the UNDP portfolio. So we're excited to be having her here and sharing her experience at the portfolio level, because we've been hearing in some of the feedback that, well, the Kenya Drylands project has been great in illustrating how change happens at the micro level. It would be interesting to see how it also happens in broader context. So she will be able to illustrate that for all of us. So yeah, and then after that, we will open it up for the Q&A session. Great. So With that in mind, let's do a recap of the three big concepts that we covered in Module 3, because we will be needing some of these for developing our systems-informed theory of change. We've discussed the domains of change extensively. These are, as you know, the key parts of the system where we say that change can take place. And this can be behaviors, power, relationships, institutions, resource flows, and mindsets. So that actually helps us break the system into meaningful areas, meaningful lens. But as everyone has been mentioning in the past sessions, these are all interconnected. So we cannot think about them as separate silos that we approach, but it's more of a powerful tool to help you see those underlying dynamics that are sometimes not considered when you're both designing as well as tracking the results of your interventions. So again, we use them as lenses for interpreting what kinds of shifts we are trying to see. Then the signals of change. These are, as we've discussed, early clues that the system might be moving, that change might be sparking. These small signs that are qualitative, they're not fully fleshed indicators that can show up as new collaborations, people speaking differently about an issue, new actors taking initiative, or the early adoption of a practice. And these signals matter because they help us track emerging change before formal outcomes appear and before it shows up in our indicator tracking matrices. And then we have the leverage points. And these are, as we call them, the strategic places where we can intervene in the system with a small, well-placed action that can open up a much bigger shift, and it can ripple across the system and, of course, your intervention. So it's important to differentiate that leverage points are not necessarily activities. They are the underlying dynamics that we would like to influence, like, for instance, how decisions are made, how information flows, or how incentive works. And they really help us because they help us prioritize what's most important to be able to shift the system. And so they help us avoid spreading our energy too thin and be able to act where the system is already primed for movement or where a small push can actually unlock wider change. So in sum, these three concepts give us a clearer view of where to act, how to sense movement, and how to work smarter in complex environments. But before we move to the spiral, I did want to check if there were any reactions or reflections to the homework, the take-home assignment that you were all tasked with in the previous module. And if you could drop your reflections in the chat, that would be most welcome. So I will stop for a few seconds here. Does anyone want to make a comment? If anyone does want to make a comment, please raise your hand. Otherwise, we will be moving on. It means that everything was clear, no reflections, or that we were maybe a little bit tired today because we're coming up to the end of the year.
We have Edwin. Edwin, do you want to share your reflection with us?
Thank you. I hope you can hear me. Now, I am just looking at what you've listed as the domains of change, of course, then maybe the different, how change happens, what triggers what, and then, of course, then what you have as the signals of change. And out of prior experience, I don't know if this is something that is relatable or not, but in an advocacy program that we implemented, and this was actually a MOFA-funded, Dutch MOFA-funded initiative, where we had classified the change under the signals of change under three key categories. And I don't know if what I'm just trying to relate with, is it something that also is relatable to this MEL 360? And where I think our thought then was that change starts from those very, very small changes. I think change of mindset, buy-in, where people are like, yes, they're like, for instance, even just agreeing to have a meeting to discuss an issue, which is sometimes, something that goes unnoticed. And then maybe they take action, they form a group, a committee or something to look into more depth over the issue. And finally, then there's maybe a policy framework that has been generated and now is actually being implemented. And in that particular program, how we then classified this change was classified under three key areas. The first one was called the agenda settings phase, where we just setting the agenda on a particular issue. The second level of change was moving to we called it a policy change, in the sense that now you're trying to craft a framework that would guide people in how they engage, how they operate. And of course, then at this point, it's not necessarily being implemented. It's just a document that guides operations. And then the final place, it was, we call it the practice change, which essentially is that now everybody is implementing the change. There's a guideline, there's all that. So I was just wondering, does that more or less mirror what we have proposed here as the signals of change, starting from the very minute to the point where now it is documented, there's a clearly defined process that is now being followed by different actors. Does that mirror? Thank you.
Yeah. I will go first, and then Zazie, if you have any comments. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Edwin, for sharing how your organization thinks about this. The way you describe the beginning, sort of as you call the, setting up the meetings, the minute, and what enables the conditions for shift to happen. That is what we understand as these early signals of change. So in that sense, that does mirror what we've done. And yeah, and then when you talk about what happens later on, the process and how it gets set, we don't necessarily consider them early signals of change, because at that point it seems that the process has been a bit more solidified. But there's different types of signals that we did not have time to cover in these modules. But absolutely, your reflection is on point, and something that I did want to highlight about everything that we've been covering is that the frameworks that we provide are all flexible, right? We're not asking anyone, and we're not saying that our domains of change are the ones that you have to follow, or you have to follow signals of change the way we are interpreting them. They are flexible frameworks for anyone to take and adapt. And also, we are here to gather how you are working on your own frameworks, and perhaps there's ways that we can feed and improve the way that we are proposing our frameworks as well. But Zazie, any reflections on that?
No, I think that's great. And I think what you're starting to lead into is what happens in the spiral, which will be great to come to. We just have maybe time for one more. So maybe Kafayat, since you were the next one, you would like to share your question, and then we might have to move on. Sorry, Hitul.
Yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity. I just want to say that my reflection so far has been that having to look back at what could cause that change, I focus mainly on the practices and processes. And I feel that where you have such practices and processes in different places, targeting maybe different actors in the different areas, when you look at them collectively, they could move up or cause that magnitude of change that could be more visible at the macro level. I feel that the last option where you are looking at the way of changing your mindset and behaviors or power dynamics might not be feasible if you don't have all those adjustments, maybe in training, all those incentives, helping to change to cause that gradual integration or inclusivity of people, in the whole strategic, in the whole interventions that could as well, shift the narrative to changing the mindset and the power dynamics and the likes. So so focusing on qualitative indicators, are very important. Those are the things that we need to focus on if you're looking for those things that would actually cause change. Those are my observations. Thank you.
Any comments, Andrea, before we move on?
No, just appreciate the reflection. Thank you for your engagement.
I just want to add one thing, Kafayat, as you were sharing that, I was thinking, because the other thing, often with MEL, what we're trying, we forget about the learning part. We're really focused on the monitoring and the demonstrating, right? But what you were talking about, it's almost like you were saying, these are also spaces in which we can learn about our assumptions and our hypothesis about our intervention, right? From a systems perspective. And I think, when you talked about the micro and the macro, looking at those relationships, some of having these frameworks helps you to investigate those hypotheses and to really understand the power of your intervention in relation to systems change, right? So I think that was very interesting. Thank you. I think we might need to move on, right? And we can, maybe Hitul, if you could put it in the message in the chat.
We do, and we are happy to take more reflections on the chat. And my colleagues are also responding to questions there. But yes, in the interest of time, we do need to move on to the spiral. So we have gone over the spiral in previous sessions, but I will do a very quick recap so that we're all on the same page, and also for people who were not able to join previous sessions. So as you can see here, we've covered the orientation lens extensively in the past sessions. But then we talk about the spiral as how systems MEL stays active. And we say that, it is more powerful to use during implementation as it helps teams really pause to make sense of what's changing, but also while staying aligned with their purpose. Instead of, as it happens to some of us, just we have a plan and we execute it, and then we don't stop at anything until we reach our indicators and targets, right? So I mean, it certainly happened to me in previous projects. So what does the spiral do in practice? It does four things, and probably more, but it helps keeps teams responsive as new patterns or signals appear. It prompts revisiting direction and boundaries as the system shifts, and it does that in these two core areas that we call them review direction and revisit systems boundaries, which is where you will go back to your strategic intent, your North Star, your vision, however you call it, and you will see, is it still applicable? Does it still make sense based on how the context has changed? I mean, as we know, sometimes, you design the project or a proposal, and then you're only implementing it a year later, right? So it's important to revisit how the conditions have changed and see if your strategic intent is still valid, and also it's important to revisit it. We recommend on an annual basis just to make sure that you're all sort of like pulling in the same direction, right? It's your North Star, your anchor that keeps your activities, your intervention strategies grounded on the shift that everyone is trying to achieve. Then it also keeps the purpose, the scope, and the roles clear during our very fast-moving work. And importantly, it supports timely course correction before any of the issues grow. So it will do that We call this area surfacing patterns, and we'll go in a bit more in depth in just a bit. And surface patterns is where you would look for signals. We've talked about the signals of change and shifts. You can use your domains of change to surface those early changes. And we will also be capturing systems informed indicators here. And importantly, based on the data, the evidence, the signals, the qualitative indicators that you're gathering in surface patterns, you can move to shift course. And this is the heart of adaptive management, where you would, based on your data, adjust strategy or partnerships, or basically course correct based on what you're seeing in the system and what you're learning. And then importantly, we talk about cultivating coherence, which really happens all along the project cycle, or the initiative cycle. But it's where you would bring people back into alignment also if you implement any changes. So we will move through this in just a bit using the example from Kenya that we've been using all along. And if you need more information, this will be in your slide deck. But in the interest of time, let me just get to the example. And we've organized the Kenya example on the spiral. As you will see, it doesn't start on review direction. It starts on surface patterns. And just to stress that the spiral, as well as the orientation lens, they're not linear. It's not a linear process that you need to follow. It's that you enter it based on where you are, and you can revisit it based on how the conditions of your project or portfolio are shifting. Okay, so just to stress that it's again, it's not a linear process. We've organized it in this way to make it easier to learn, but it's absolutely modular, and there's different entry points. So the first entry point for the Kenya Drylands project was surfacing patterns. So if you remember correctly, this was a very sort of traditional productivity project, and they were tracking yields and trainings. But once they started actually listening through community check-ins, what the system was, as we say, whispering, and through photo diaries and seasonal forums, a different picture emerged. So they shifted from tracking just yields, productivity, trainings, income, to actually paying attention to who had voice, how relationships were evolving, and whether trust was taking root. So that shift helped them see these early signals of change. So they saw women stepping into informal roles, youth forming marketing groups, agroforestry spreading beyond pilots, and a new language and narrative forming around stewardship. They also picked up, importantly, on pressure points, boreholes breaking down, land tensions rising, women being excluded from training, and charcoal use remaining a fallback. And these signals, importantly, were not showing up in the routine metrics that they were collecting, but instead they revealed deeper shifts that were unfolding in real time. And this is exactly what the spiral is designed for, to help teams notice change while it's happening, not months later, when you're preparing your midterm report, your annual report with your evaluations, but actually when these changes are occurring. So what did they do based on what the system was telling them, based on the signals that they were collecting and the patterns that they were surfacing? These patterns prompted a review direction moment. So the team paused and asked whether focusing on productivity alone was actually building resilience. So they brought in together women, elders, and youth to shape the reflection. And together, they anchored around one clear strategic intent. And this is what we've covered in previous sessions, but they agreed that what they were aiming for was a resilient dryland system where food, water, and energy are secured through stewardship and communities sustain their livelihoods over time. So review direction is really about stepping back or taking a pause during implementation to check whether your work and your MEL is still reflecting and aligned to that deeper purpose that you and your key stakeholders are seeking. So with a stronger purpose in place, they move to revisit boundaries. So in this specific spiral area, you would revisit your boundaries and also your spheres. So what did they do? They widened their boundary beyond farm productivity to include watershed governance, migration, local communities, and nearby markets, because they realized that these forces were also shaping their outcomes. And they also revisited their spheres. As you remember, the spheres of control, influence, and interest. So women's cooperatives and water committees were no longer just participants. They became co-governors with growing influence, which changed the project spheres of influence in turn. What else did they do? They reassessed the leverage points and saw that shared governance, not necessarily technical inputs, was what was driving true resilience. So they adjusted MEL priorities to track signals related to trust, participation, and decision making. Again, not just productivity metrics. With clearer boundaries and stronger signals, the team moved to shift course. Again, the heart of adaptive management. And this is intentional adaptation, using evidence, local insight, and emerging signals to recalibrate plans before small issues turn into major problems. So they made targeted adjustments based on the patterns that were emerging. They centered women's leadership, redesigning training with women's cooperatives in mind. They strengthened governance, linking borehole work to watershed committees. They built on youth momentum, supporting marketing networks. And they invested in regeneration, expanding agroforestry to stabilize soil and water. And as you can see, these weren't huge pivots. They didn't completely change the scope of their intervention, but these were instead timely corrections that kept the project aligned with the strategic intent that they had co-created. And then, and I will pass it to my colleague Sassy in just a second, they moved to cultivate coherence. And so what they did is they brought groups back together, and they agreed to interpret signals and agree on next steps. But passing it on to you, Sassy, for a deeper explanation on this.
Yeah, and just as Andrea said earlier, this is something that often and should happen throughout your work. It's not something that you just do at a point in time. And it's critical because you have to, I think, really appreciate that an intervention on its own is not going to change a system, right? It takes a system to change a system. So you need to build, this shared path for change across more than just your team. The other thing to remember with Cultivate Coherence is that it's a two-way street, right? So as much as you're trying to share the intelligence you're gathering and how you're making sense of change, etc., you're also constantly listening and learning about how others are making sense of the space and which direction you might shift in together. So it's a two-way street. It's not just us influencing others. It's an exchange between us and other interested parties in the system that also, this is a system of interest for them for various reasons. What it ultimately helps to do, and Simone is going to speak a little bit more about this when she shares some of the work that she's been involved in, is it helps to reorient everyone towards a shared direction. And we call it coherence because it doesn't mean you're all doing the same thing, right? It doesn't mean that you're exactly doing the same activities, etc. at all. What it means is that you've got a coherent you do coherent activities, you do coherent things in the system that all help move towards this shared goal that you're working towards. And what's really great in the Kenya example is you can see the strategies, the techniques that they use to do this. And Andrea's already spoken about these at all the other steps, right? So creating shared spaces where you have forums where people come together to make sense of things, doing participatory MEL where you're bringing in voices from others, right? And this is something that I think as MEL people we know quite well. Developing learning products so you can disseminate this information as well. And continually embedding alignment. So county leaders updated water norms and donor adjusted MEL expectations. So you're constantly making tweaks to your own strategy. You're recognizing the coherence that you're developing together, and you're thinking constantly about how do we need to adapt, and others are thinking about that too if you're going along for the journey together. So this is really critical to the practice and key if you want to be doing systems change, because you do not have an intervention that changes a system unless you live in societies and political systems we probably don't want to be part of. So if you're into democratic spaces, etc., cultivating coherence is really important. I'll hand back over to you, Andrea.
Thank you so much, Zazie. Amazing. So we are all done with the spiral. I know that this was a lot to cover. And so please let us know in the as the team has explained that you can ask any questions with the Q&A function in Zoom. So if you have any questions about the spiral, this is your opportunity as well. To share that, please. Wonderful. So now we are going to be moving on to the walkthroughs. We're going to be starting with the systems informed theory of change. So I will pull it up in just a second. And then we are going to be moving to an example about strategic intent and domains of change at a portfolio level. So let's start doing that. And then in just after that, we are going to be moving on to the Ask Me Anything session. Okay, so just 1 second while I get my materials together. And so we are excited today because we have finally completed an exercise that was taking us a bit of time, in that you all probably saw the how-to sheets that we have developed. So we were working really hard, the team was working really hard in turning them into facilitation templates that you can use online. Okay, so let me just show you that because we just also put it in the website. Okay, so I will guide you to show you where we put them. Wonderful. So when you enter the website, you will get to this page. Okay, so if you want to look for the tools, they are embedded in each of the sections. But if you want a repository, you can go to Resources, MEL 360 Practical Tools, and you will find them here. Okay, so here you can find the how-to sheets with the detailed step-by-step, but the facilitation templates are right here. And thank you, Mary Sue, for the comment that will the how-to sheets be translated? Well, we certainly hope so, but that will have to be for a subsequent phase, because we've done everything that we can with the current project that we have in place that is actually wrapping up in December. But we'll talk a little bit about that towards the end. Great. So I've entered the Systems Informed Theory of Change Facilitation template, and it has an accompanying how-to sheet. You will be able to find it here. If you click here, it takes you to this section. Okay, so here, honestly, if I was going to start working on this, I would start with this, with the how-to sheet, because it explains the purpose of the tool, when to use it, who would need to be involved in this exercise. It has even suggested session formats. For instance, for a theory of change, we suggest 2 or 3 collaborative sessions, and it has the step-by-step instructions. But just in the interest of time, I will walk you through the facilitation template. That would be for me the second step after having reviewed this with my team to be able to conduct this in practice. Okay, so what are we going to be doing? We are going to be building a systems-informed theory of change that shows you how your initiative's actions may contribute to systemic change, while of course staying grounded in what you can control and influence. Importantly, this typically we recommend that this comes after you've discussed your strategic intent, your systems boundaries, have done some light systems mapping, have defined which domains of change you are going to be tracking and designing with, and your leverage points and spheres of control and influence. So I know it seems like a lot. This doesn't always happen. It's just a recommendation. So let me go back to the facilitation template. Okay, great. So first, we recommend that you gather and review the following foundational pieces that we've gone through in the previous modules, right? So you can note your strategic intent or your long-term change. What are you seeking for in terms of systems transformation? And this goes, as we know, beyond your project timeline. Then we ask you to note here, or you can note here, your strategic intent contribution, and this is in the how-to sheet for the strategic intent. We didn't get to cover this in detail. However, you will find it in the materials and in the website, and we can show you in just a bit if you have any questions. So this is essentially the direction of change that you aim to support within your project lifetime. So you can think about 3 to 5 years, but it is not another outcome. It is what you are contributing to. And you can use your domains of change to help define these shifts. So you can also note your domains of change as the key dimensions that you want to influence. Again, there's been a lot of feedback around the interconnectedness of these domains of change. We do, you can select a few priority domains of change that you will be focusing on, but we always recommend that you keep track of the other domains of change because, if you decide that you are not focusing on mindsets, for instance, because of the duration of your project and because of the scope of your project, there has to be, you have to be aware of what's happening in terms of that if you are actually thinking about long-term shifts, right? So is any other initiative covering this? Is there a government program that's working on this? How do we work together to achieve this long-term change? And then your sphere of control activities. So if you remember correctly, this is what you do directly, what you can directly control. And this can be trainings, facilitation, storytelling, labs, convening, etc. Importantly, last session we covered leverage points because we do recommend that you prioritize your activities based on your leverage points. Okay, so ideally, your activities will have been informed by your leverage point identification so that you're not, so that you're focusing where you have more likelihood to have a systemic impact. Then after you have gathered these different concepts, these different elements, we invite you to map the contribution pathways. Okay, so let me just go here to this mapping sheet. So here in the activities row, you could add your activities around your sphere of control. You could, if you wish, tag the relevant domains of change that you are addressing with each of your activities. You would add also the early and deeper systemic shifts, and you can get these from your spheres of influence. Okay, so these are the more durable system level changes that you're aiming to influence, and this can be shifts in norms, new incentives or rules, strengthened ownership. Again, this represent meaningful systemic movement. You would also place your strategic intent contribution on the right. So this is a direction where all your systemic shifts should be pointing toward. So this is not another shift, it's the overarching change trajectory you are contributing to. And then you would draw the contribution pathways. And as you can see, these are not linear. So you can use arrows to map how change flows from activities, early shifts, deeper shifts, and you can please allow pathways to cross or branch or loop back, converge, because this is what happens when you're working on systems change and when you're taking a systems perspective, and they can absolutely diverge. And then we invite you to add feedback loops, and there's a deeper explanation on feedback loops here. So you could add reinforcing or balancing feedback loops on your map. So what is a feedback loop first, right? Just so everyone is clear on this. It shows how a change in one part of the system influences another part. And then it can come back around to reinforce or counteract the original change. So reinforcing loops is where change amplifies. They create momentum, virtuous cycles, snowball effects. It could be, for instance, more farmers adopt a practice, and that creates more visibility and social proof. And then there's more farmers adopting the practice, right? It's a reinforcing loop. And then we also have balancing loops. And this is where change can be resisted or stabilized. And it basically keeps things the same. So it could be, for instance, that youth gain leadership visibility, elders feel threatened, elders block access to decision making, and youth visibility can drop again. So what balancing loops tell us is where is the system pushing back and where we might need safeguards or engagement strategies or tackle different leverage points. Then we also invite you to mark your key assumptions. So this is where your logic depends on conditions that must hold. So assumptions are the conditions that we are actually depending on our theory of change to make sense, even though we don't fully control them. So an assumption could be, for instance, local leaders remain open to collaboration, market actors are willing to pilot alternative pricing models, youth continue to participate actively. And so we invite you to mark that with a star to make sure that you are taking into account and are considering where there's uncertainty and what you need to monitor, not just deliver. And that also will help you guide adaptive management. And you can also turn these assumptions into learning questions for your MEL. So a good rule of thumb is that whenever you draw an arrow here and catch yourself saying, assuming this happens, that's where you would place an assumption. So this is it. That is the systems informed theory of change. We have taken inspiration from Isabel Vogel's depiction of a theory of change that you can also find here. This is a bit more complex and thinking about systemic interventions, but please do have a look because it is an excellent resource that we were hoping, to be able to present today, but unfortunately she had a family emergency and couldn't be here. But anyways, she's someone to keep in mind as she's working on these issues as well. I will stop sharing here. Again, if you have any questions, and I know that this was a lot of information, please do ask them in the Q&A. And now we will move on to my colleague Simone's presentation. So I did a brief introduction before, and great. So again, she's a designer from the System Transformation and Innovation team. Now it's the STI, before it was Strategic Innovation Unit. And she's going to be presenting a case about social cohesion from Sao Tomé and Príncipe from the UNDP portfolio. So I will pass it on to Simone for this presentation.
Thank you very much, Andrea, and hello, everyone. It's good to be back. Perhaps before I start sharing my slides, just a bit of context. All the guidance that you find at 360 MEL, they apply for portfolios, apply for projects and programs. Why UNDP created portfolios for system change? Because we understood at some point that some projects, they have log frames and requirements from donors that do not allow all this flexibility, adaptability that we need. So that's why we created portfolios that we've been implementing more than 100 countries and cities. Today, I'm going to speak specifically about São Tomé and Príncipe to make it a bit more tangible. And going back to what Andrea and Zazie said, all this guidance is very flexible. So you're going to see that how we adapted for portfolios in the case of São Tomé. So let me go now full screen here. I don't know if everybody heard about São Tomé. It's a very beautiful country in the coast of Africa, very rich in terms of nature, in terms of humans, resources, and so on, but very similar to other countries. It's very fragmented when you look at what all the development ecosystem actors are doing, not because people don't want to do a good job, because most of the times we are all strained by our mandates, by the KPIs, by the projects that we already have in place. And sometimes what happens is that you have a context where there is a lot of duplication, more than one institution doing capacity building or other initiatives. All of them, they are relevant. However, we are not moving the entire system to the same direction. So what Zazie was talking about, how do we make this system and the initiatives a bit more coherent so we can actually see deeper change and not just a bit of improvement, So we started this work in São Tomé and Príncipe in April. It is still ongoing, not perfect at all, but we are seeing some positive and very good, successful things happening there. The first one, so you see this fragmented ecosystem, and we start building a strategic intent. So what is this common direction that we want, not only UNDP, because we know that UNDP cannot transform a system. We need to work with other ministries. We need to work with other international NGOs, civil society organizations that are already there, and have a common understanding of what we want to do together. In this case, we chose social cohesion because it's a country that is facing a lot of problems in terms of people not trusting each other, problems in the elections, problems in transparency, and so on. So they chose that, okay, we need to transform and improve social cohesion, but not only looking at social cohesion from a governance or transparency perspective, but how we can have a more broader and a systemic view on this. So in our direction, we chose 3 effects: rebuild trust, expand and deepen social justice, and create and grow sustainable economic opportunities. What is different having a direction instead of an objective? And you can see these 3 effects are long-term. There isn't a ministry responsible for trust. So it's something that is transversal to all ministries that can work on that. And again, you are not seeing only a governance perspective on social cohesion, but we are seeing that we need to improve and have more opportunities, so youth want to stay in the country and have a well-being and be happier, right? And we also want jobs that are more sustainable and friendly to the environment and so on. So that's the difference. And finding these three effects, it's a quite a laborious thing, right? It involves bringing all these actors that you're seeing below to a common understanding. And when you see in the coalition, you are seeing a Ministry of Education. So again, a Ministry of Education, you don't see an effect related to education, but it can contribute to all of this. So we are not changing the mandate of this organization or institutions. We are just seeing then what is a common agenda for them. Then again, we are using this spiral, but not exactly, it's not always linear, but there is a time after you have this common direction set up, you're starting identifying the system boundaries, right? Like how far are we seeing social cohesion, and where can we start seeing change? Where can change happens? At portfolios, MEL is at the core. So it's not something that you do just for compliance, but it's something that will get to evolve what the activities and the interventions of this portfolio. So we use a lot and put a lot of emphasis on the word learning and all the things that we need to do for learning, because we believe that before we jump into actions, we need to identify multiple positions that are sources of learning about the complex policy problem. So what you are seeing in the photo is kind of a canvas that we draw on the floor, and then people are understanding what are dynamics they want to learn more about the system. So there is one axis that is about resources, the other one about actors. I picked up only 3. We created more than 20, but just for you to have a better understanding. For instance, we want to learn and go where communities, groups, and civil society organizations are testing waste management business models to generate youth employment. Why this is important, like waste management for social cohesion? Again, this is something already happening in São Tomé and Príncipe. So we are not creating something from nowhere. This is why we understand about domains of change. We are working with what is there instead of bringing a solution for outside. Or the last one, going where public schools are hosting community gardens and managing excess produce. We know there is one school with a project and initiative that is working on this. So we can learn from that, because we understood also that in São Tomé, you don't have problems of famine, but you do have problems with malnutrition. And we also have problems with youth opportunities. But then can we learn from what this school is doing? And then can we see an entry point to accelerate some change? So what we do here, it's again, mapping what is there and what do we want to learn. And then we place our activities, interventions, or actions way more effective, no? What you saw in the last image about people putting these dynamics, we clustered them in areas. So you see that this portfolio of social cohesion has an area on green transition. But why green transition again? Well, I mean, it's a country that faces problems with energy. But if you don't have energy, the streets are very dark at say 6 p.m. and people will not go out and socialize with others. So again, all of these areas, they're here because there was a deep understanding of what was happening in the system. And we want to tackle from a cross-sectorial view instead of just, to improve social cohesion, we're just going to work on the justice system of São Tomé. We understand that we need to improve the justice system, but we also need to look to the broader picture. So you have one area that is abundant futures, that is all about new opportunities for young, for women. We have an area that is a life free of violence against, because it's something that it is happening there in terms of problems against women, against children. The first 1,000 days, so like how we enable children as when they are born also to become citizens, have all access to registries, birth registries, certifications, IDs. So they have from the get-go, they have a very good start of their life. Again, what you are seeing here, it is this portfolio that is a snapshot, is going to continue evolve. And it's going to continue evolve because all these interventions and all these members of these different organizations, they will come every 2-3 weeks to learning sessions. And in these learning sessions, we will try to, from this work, have new answers for instance, the two questions that you're seeing there. What will make Santomeans hopeful and proud of their country's future? What will make young Santomeans want to stay in the country instead of going elsewhere? These are just one of the examples of the learning session, the learning questions that are guiding these moments. And this is key, right? Because we're going to evolve our interventions, all the dots that you are seeing in the circle, based on this learning, and we're going to keep adapting. And we are using a portfolio as an instrument because it has this flexibility of allocating and changing more rapidly. And last, going back to the point of what Zazie was saying about cultivating coherence, we understand coherence, I learned this from my boss, is not homogeneity, right? It's not doing all the same thing. It is having diversity. And that's why also portfolios need these cross-sectorial actions, because it's not fixing only education that you're going to have more people with more skills. You need to think about the whole picture. As I said, all these members of this coalition that we have been building, they meet frequently, not to coordinate, but to learn together, which is a bit different. You know, we love coordination in this sector, but it's about learning, it's about sharing what is working, what is not, identifying new opportunities, synergies, and making decisions together about new actions. And this is what evolves the portfolio and helps with this coherence. It's going to be perfect, possibly not, but it's going to help. We also embed deep listening in terms of every member of this coalition needs to constantly have a conversation with the people in São Tomé and Príncipe and bring this, what they are listening to, these learning questions. Again, because we don't want MEL practices only for the M&E expert. Everybody needs to be constantly listening and reflecting of what they are doing, right? So we are putting at the core of development practitioners to have this skill. Perhaps not as deep as some of you in this call, but it's to everyone. And the third one is that cultivating coherence is also continuing this coalition building, right? Which actors do we need to invite? You know, they are still not there. And every actor that comes in comes with a new perspective. And then you might need to revisit the intent that they have in the beginning. So that's going back to this spiral. So again, this is the work that we've been doing this year in São Tomé and Príncipe. It's very similar to the other countries that we're implementing, but I really proud of their work, and not only me, but all the team that is there and all these partners, because it's quite hard to bring all these partners at the same table and have this shared agenda. So that's it from my, and I welcome any questions that you might have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Simone. That was really great. And it's so wonderful to have you talk us through an example at a portfolio level as well, particularly in showing what cultivating coherence looks like. So now we're opening the Q&A session, right, Andrea? Yep.
Absolutely.
So we've got a couple of questions from the Mentimeter that we'll start with, but if you have any questions, you can either add them to the Q&A, or the other way to do it is to put your hand up and to share your question verbally with us, which is great as well. But just to warm us up and start us off, I might just direct to Andrea a couple of questions on domains of change. One being, why is it important to prioritize a few domains of change? And there was a comment in the chat, I think it was from Mary Sue, about the fact that keeping an eye on all of the domains of change gives you flexibility to respond to changes. And associated with that, how to arrive on an agreement regarding the domains of change and leverage points among stakeholders. So if you just want to speak to a couple of things to that, would be great.
Yeah. No, thank you. Thank you for the warm up, Zazie. So we have absolutely been discussing this previously, and we absolutely know that domains of change are interconnected. And so just to clarify, we're not really choosing which domains of change need to happen for change to take place. We choose and we prioritize the ones where we need to, and where we can focus our attention first, based on, you can think about the scope of your project, right? So prioritizing these domains of change really help us see where energy is the strongest, and it allows coordination across teams. And again, it is, you can say that to reach our strategic intent, we need to consider all the domains of change. Absolutely, absolutely. But for our specific interventions, it can be helpful to select a few where we can concentrate most of our energy while keeping an eye out, as Mary Sue said, on what's happening in the other domains of change, right? So if helpful, you can think about your spheres of control, influence, and interest, and thinking about what you can control and influence and what stays outside of that, but you need to keep track of. So I hope that helped. Let me move on to the next question, and then Zazie, feel free to chime in and complement my answers, of course. So in terms of having agreement on domains of change, so this is tricky. We absolutely don't want you to meet with your key stakeholders and just dot vote on your most critical domains of change. What we want, however, is to create a shared minimum understanding of the system and where you are focusing on. So in terms of reaching this agreement, or more importantly, surfacing the different perspectives around where you want to go, you can absolutely use systems mapping to show patterns and relationships. You will be also taking from lived experience of your stakeholders, and you would be conducting sense making just to see where energy and constraints are. So in our experience, it's not quite straightforward if you meet with a larger group of stakeholders to come up with prioritized domains of change. But what you can find agreement on is where the system feels stuck, and where there can be small shifts that can unlock bigger effects, bigger results. So if you agree, on this sort of like minimum conditions, then you can, based on that, work on your priority domains of change. But just to say, when you conduct any of these exercises, I personally consider the discussions and perspectives that arise, from these conversations much more important than the result itself. So just bear in mind that the process is really what makes these exercises valuable, both because of what because you can tag into different perspectives, but also because of what you build, the inclusivity, the building together, that really does, in our experience, help shape how you are conducting your programming. But I will stop at that. Zazie, if there's anything you would like to add, please.
No, I think that was great, Andrea. There's an interesting question here for Simone as well, which, the question, Simone, and I'll just read it out so everyone's got it. You said that coherence is having diversity. I couldn't understand this. How, with diversity, do you reach coherence? So there's a really interesting tension, right, between these two things. And Simone, it'd be great if you could illustrate that. And then we can go to Maria.
Thank you. And it's a very great question. I have an example top of my mind. It's not from São Tomé. Príncipe is from Montevideo, but I think it will illustrate well what is coherence and what we mean by it. Oftentimes when ministries, all these actors, they work in their silos, their mandates, end up releasing policies that are contradicting each other, but they're relevant. For instance, in Montevideo, there was a time that at the municipality, it's the capital of Uruguay, the Department of Environment prohibit that people that work with waste management do the selection of at their home, right? Because this could contaminate their soil, it's quite dangerous, the chemicals and so on. So they have all the rights to say that, okay, please stop doing that. But at the day after, the Department of Social Development said, okay, no, but this is their main income. If you prohibit these people doing it, how they gonna live? And then they went back with the policy. So you have this incoherent, that makes people's life very traumatic, very difficult, because you have different actors. Again, the Department of Environment had all the right to say this contaminates the soil, and the other one of like, this is the income, so you cannot prohibit and so on. But because they didn't see it and have this shared agenda, how are we going to do this transition? Because we know that we don't want people working as waste pickers and doing all of this. That is not good for their well-being and so on, but we need a better plan of transition of this. So again, if we want to improve or help the green transition of the city, we cannot only work with the Department of Environment. We need to work with the other departments, because this is all intertwined. And even though there are national plans, there are strategic plans for city levels and so on, very much they are crafted in the beginning, very beautiful, but then everybody goes out with their own, I want this objective, like I'm running for my KPIs and I have my own budget. So it's very like how the institutions were conceptualized also prevent us for collaborating more. And I think what portfolio makes is kind of a glue between all of these people. So they're going to continue working. You're going to continue being a specialist on environment, the other one in social development and so on. But you force these people to collaborate and see things in a bigger picture. Maybe Zazie, do you have anything to add?
No, I think you did a really good job, and it's a difficult thing to explain. And I think when you do systems change work, you really start to see the contradictions all around us in the system. And the reality is, like when we were talking about cultivating coherence, is just because we're all working towards the same direction doesn't mean we all do the same thing, right? So, and there's strength in diversity. I mean, particularly when you're looking at addressing inclusion challenges, like every time you address part of the inclusion challenge, it usually reveals more areas and more groups that are not included, right? So it's this constant work of understanding the
I believe Zazie is frozen, right?
Yes.
Maria has a hand up. Perhaps we could go to Maria's
Yes,
question.
thanks.
Hi, Maria.
Hello, everyone. A couple of quick questions. First of all, thank you so much for everything, for this fourth module and all the other modules, and the facilitation notes are amazing. So thanks a lot. We really appreciate it. A couple of quick questions. One is about the early signs of change. So it sounds simple to say, yes, monitor early signs of change, but I'm wondering, how do you see this from your perspective working in reality? So you can have, let's say, women join some committees and some people be accepting of that. But then in other parts of the system, for example, the same women who would like to join committees may face backlash. So it seems that there's contradictory signs of change that are happening at the same time. So in some cases, there could be some positive signs, but on the same issue, other parts of the system could be facing a backlash or a regression in the signs of change. So I'm wondering, how do you make sense of all those contradictions and things moving in different directions? That's one thing. And the other one is, with everything that's happening in the sector right now, so all the cuts, donors, etc., everything that's going on, do you see any openness or any entry points for more systems informed MEL to be practiced, or even greater curiosity by systems actors or by donors or by implementers for systems informed MEL? And what would it take for us as MEL professionals to be advocating for more systems-informed MEL? Thank you.
Those are great questions, Maria. So thank you so much for asking those. I mean, you bring a really critical point in terms of I mean, both your questions, but the signals of change. Absolutely, there can be contradictions, you know, even on the same topic or area. And you know, we basically recommend that you keep track of that, you know, and you can think about having targeted strategies, you know, for each group that you're working with, you know. So this is just like general sort of like project practice, you know, you have disaggregated groups, you know, and how do you tackle what you're seeing based on, you know, the signals that are emerging. So what the signals do is that they help you track those emerging shifts that are happening that you might not be able to see, you know, if you just track your indicators and do your traditional MEL reporting, etc. However, they don't quite help us when it comes to that, you know, addressing the contradictions that we might see in the system itself. That's just kind of like it feeds the information, it feeds us more information and data so that we can adjust our planning and our strategy and our delivery of activities. But anything else on this question from the team or anyone else here on the meeting?
I missed the beginning, apologies, but I think Maria, like what you described, what I caught of what you were describing is systems change, right? Like as you get into this work, all the contradictions start to surface. Casey Berterman and Julia Kaufman have a piece which you can have a look at. I'll put in the chat in a minute around looking for confirming and disconfirming evidence, right? Because the system doesn't just play a game, right? It's its own kind of reality, right? So we should expect to find contradictions. We should expect to find evidence that demonstrates that things are not moving in the direction we were hoping they would move in. But definitely developing, you know, what I would call the systems gaze is really important for us to be more powerful through our work. But I'll hand over to Simone, who suggested answering the second part of your question.
Yes, thank you, Zazie. And it's a great question, Maria, on the donors, you know, if they are open to it. Within our work on portfolios for system change, and I put the publication in the chat, you can see that there are already many countries that were able to mobilize this money for a portfolio instead of a single project. So it's kind of this money that comes and you can disperse with a bit more flexibility, and then it also allows, you know, have MEL at like the greatest, you know, highlight in this process. What we've seen as a benefit for a donor is that instead of receiving hundreds of reports, you know, fragmented about where their money is going, you have a more unified narrative on how this is helping moving a system, right? And their impact. So from a donor perspective, you also start having a more, instead of like a UNDP that have like many thousands of projects, you start having one that is more comprehensive, more meaningful as well. And I think it holds what Zazie said, all the contradictions, right? Because sometimes the more traditional M&E reports and so on, they do not hold the space, or the log frames, they do not hold the space for telling everything that is happening there, you know, in these systems. And that's what we find with donors. Of course, not all of them are open, because this is also a system, right, that we need to start changing. But we are seeing early signs of donors. They're interested, they're putting money there. Also, through the portfolio instrument, you can get many donors to pool fund into a single portfolio instead of each one funding their single point solution, right? So this is also was the advantage that moved UNDP to this instrument, because it's more effective, is you use better the resources that are out there. Over to you, Zazie or Andrea.
I can chime in as well on this question, Maria. So from my point of view, and my experience was mainly in the US. So I would say that some of the main players that were promoting systems change, systems MEL, were unfortunately USAID and other US agencies. So, as we know, that space has completely changed. And so, USAID is no longer there. There are other US agencies that are still adopting these approaches, but they're keeping it under the radar at the moment just because of the political situation. However, I must say, and we're actually holding a donor dialogue coming up this week. There are some donors in the international arena, and I can mention the Global Environmental Facility, and they are embracing a systems change perspective, and that is something that they want to incorporate in their portfolio. They're incorporating transformation levers in every one of their investments. And we see the same with other donors. You've probably heard a lot about systems change. Everyone's talking about it. However, what I have noticed is that in terms of translating it into systems MEL, that's where there's, it's a bit more stuck, right? So it's like, how do we go from wanting this long-term transformation to actually being able to design for this and track that, right? So that's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to sort of bridge that space and also push the agenda with donors as well. So just to say that there is energy, it's how do we, push it forward so that we are able to design and track for long-term transformation. And in turn, we are responding to what donors are asking for, which is systems change, right? And they are asking for this as well as, Simone mentioned, it's more efficient to look at the portfolio level. But also, as we see funds contracting, everyone wants a better bang for their buck, right? Like we're not just looking at, delivering on, linear interventions, linear outputs. It's how do we have a holistic view of the system to create more long-term change. So, but I will stop here to give a turn to the other questions.
And Sue, did you want to add something in? Is that why you've got your hand raised?
Yes. Thank you, Maria, for that question. I just wanted to add a perspective from the Sandbox, which is a community that mostly features practitioners. What we are seeing is that lots of practitioners, organizations are intuitively working systemically. They're working with communities. They hear how communities operate. They're collecting data that goes way beyond the mandate of donor metrics and reporting. And a lot of communities have this information stored somewhere and are collecting data that has a certain value to communities. So beyond beyond centering donors and funders, we are also seeing and hearing that lots of communities, local philanthropies, local NGOs collect a lot of information that goes beyond what we see in reports and in donor reports. And so there is an appetite beyond what donors are sometimes ready to see or interested in seeing. And that is something that we need to keep in mind as we are sitting wherever we're sitting, that there's lots of work going on and there's lots of data stored in community organizations that is intuitively systemic, but might not have the language that we recognize.
Yeah, 100%. So I want to take us to a question that's maybe more technical. And I'm wondering, Simone, if you might want to answer this one first. And I'm thinking particularly about the work that the team you're working with has been doing around dynamic management and so on. So, and you mentioned this, but obviously it might have just flown over people's head because it was quite quickly shared. But there was a question around, is it safe to say that the early signs in the short term are, the traditional MEL is the traditional MEL term. So, how we're thinking when we put, I suppose, theories of change that then become log frameworks and what we expect to see in the short term. And how would we ensure then that it will be captured? Right. So this is something that Sue was just talking about as well. Do you usually develop learning agenda or any tool to capture these early signals? And I know you've been doing a lot of thinking about this, and lots of people are also thinking about digital solutions for this, etc. So it'd be great to get your experience.
Yeah, and thank you for this question. I haven't have something prepared exactly for this, but as Zazie said, we are trying multiple ways. One, okay, everybody that comes to these learning sessions, we have a bit of reflection that is collective, but of course we try to synthesize them in a learning card, very concrete, what was the insight, where does it come from? So indicate some signals of change that you have collected. And then what could be the new options? What can we do differently for this, right? What happens at UNDP, we have a signals or change platform that you can collect, but we also suggest and motivate a lot that all these members from different organizations that are involved, they also collect. So bring to these learning sessions some news that you've read or some conversations that you had with someone, because this is quite important. So you make these learning sessions very content driven instead of just coordinating, just saying what you said, like what I've done this week. No, but what are you hearing out there? And then we make it this, we have this fancy name of development intelligence reports and briefs, but it's just a name that is very short. Because nobody wants to read a 200 pages report. It's very short and very action driven to be shared with the leadership of the organizations that are leading this, and very concrete in terms of what we need to do differently in 2 weeks or in 1 month. I think that's what I can say. And of course, as Aziz said, as portfolios grow, it's almost impossible now even to put in one slide, right, the visualization. So we are testing different platforms and how you can visualize, because all this coalition of actors, they also evolve. They start doing things between themselves and so on. And this is very important because, as Zazie said, system change is very messy, right? And how do you visualize that all of this is also changing, right? And how this type of visualization help to see if the change, it is a bit more towards the direction of change that we try, or is actually regressing, right? Because then it's also important to collect. Perhaps that's it from my side.
No, that's fantastic, and thank you for that rich description. We're just going to do one last question, which I'm going to ask Andrea to answer, and then we will close because we're almost at finish. But one of the questions was around how do you incorporate the system MEL into your other management processes? Andrea, what are your thoughts?
Yes, so very, very quickly, we've been doing this for large scale programming at UNDP. And I must say that the first thing that we do is a diagnosis, an assessment of what are the current M&E management practices that are happening in the specific initiative. And then we tailor our approach based on that. 3 examples on what we're doing, and this is on the Blue and Green Island project. When we are thinking about planning, and every project, every initiative has to go through planning. The way that we are doing it, for instance, and we're doing, for instance, right now, annual planning, right? So how do we shift from thinking about the activities that we need to deliver based on our outputs to actually thinking about what behaviors need to change, ideally this year and in the coming years, so that we are able to be closer to our strategic intent, right? So just shifting that thought instead of activities that are in the project document towards behaviors that need to shift has been very powerful. Then the other thing, and there were a lot of questions around signals of change. We are integrating this into a tracking tool that we will be sharing with the different country projects that are part of this initiative. So this is going to be a very simple form. And importantly, the data that we're gathering from the teams on early signals will feed onto, you can do it in different ways. In our case, it will be a dashboard, but in other cases, it could be a portfolio digest. The important thing is that we're not just extracting this information, is that we're returning it back to the country teams so that it can inform their programming and it can help strengthen their strategies. So just the fact that we're doing, this like learning loop again is very powerful, and it indicates a shift because we're not just looking at, we extract information from the implementation teams. It's just how do we learn together to improve our implementation. And then the other thing that we're doing is that we are incorporating pause and reflect cycles. So we're doing this at different levels, with the core team, with the country teams, but importantly with the donor as well. So strategically, we are incorporating these pause and reflects to look at, what challenges are emerging. It's a really interesting framing because you can look at where are we not achieving the results that we are expecting as well, right? And this all helps frame things for the donor, and that in turn helps have strategic steering committees that are more informed by what's happening on the ground. So this is a mindset shift, that we are pushing with donors as well. But I will leave it at that. I'm happy to follow up with any other questions regarding how we are implementing this at UNDP. But I would like to pass it on to Fede, who will explain a couple final steps on the homeworks that you all need to do to the take-home assignments for your certificate, and a very quick survey from today, and then we can wrap up.
Thanks, Andrea. I hope you can see my screen. Thank you, everyone, for joining us throughout the whole series. We would really want to hear your feedback about the whole series, so please take some time to fill out this survey. Also, in the slide deck, you will find a slide with the resources about the whole series. And as part of, let's say, the requirements for obtaining the certificate of completion, we will kindly ask you to not only complete the reflection assignments, but also complete the feedback survey by December 10th. If you have any questions related to the assignments or the feedback survey or any other questions, please feel free to reach out to me or Andrea via email. Over to you, Andrea.
Yes, so we are at time. So I just wanted to say, and also responding to one question that emerged, what happens now, right? So we've gone through this wonderful journey together. It has been extremely enriching for all of us. And we do take your feedback very seriously. So please, anything that we can improve, we will take note of that. We do take feedback to heart. As I had mentioned before, this project, it's called the Systems Monitoring and Learning Evaluation, funded by the Gates Foundation, is wrapping up in December. So in terms of trainings, this was the last module. However, we are hoping to have a phase 2, this time with multiple donors, but that is still in the works. And 2, UNDP will be adopting these approaches at the portfolio level, as Simone has already explained, and also with donor-funded work, for instance, by the Global Environmental Facility. So we will be having some updates on that work that we will be sharing. But also the MEL Sandbox will be the space where we will be communicating any upcoming activities. Okay, so do keep, if you haven't joined the MEL Sandbox, just please do, because there might be some updates there coming up. And in the meantime, you can absolutely reach out to us through the MEL 360 email, which will continue to be operational throughout next year. And we will also be sharing next steps via email as well. But Zazie, Simone, anything that you would like to add in terms of how we are moving forward?
No, just thank you very much for coming and being part of this, Simone.
Oh, thank you. It's greatly appreciated. And we are looking forward to receive your feedback. Thank you.